Paul Peter Piech was a humanitarian, a graphic designer, and a prolific printmaker. Florida Atlantic University is home to a collection of 88 Piech prints, and the University Galleries is pleased to present 38 of these prints for the exhibition Paul Peter Piech Activist Prints from the 1970s and 80s. To complement the exhibition, we have invited Piech expert Jim Creed to discuss Piech's works with us. Jim was coordinator of the Regional Print Center at Coleg Cambria in Wrexham, North Wales, where he was responsible for the promotion, display, and handling of the college's Piech collection, which is the largest in Wales with over 200 prints. He has also conducted extensive research into the artist, authored numerous articles, and co-curated a major retrospective exhibition dedicated to all defenders of human freedoms, the art of Paul Peter Piech, at the People's History Museum in Manchester in 2017. We appreciate his continued support of our exhibition. Jim, thank you so much for meeting with us today. We are excited to have you.
Thank you for the invitation to take part in the interview. And I'm looking forward to discussing your exhibition and collection further.
I would actually like to start by addressing the condition of Piech's prints. For example, some of the works are printed on colored papers, some have numbered labels stuck to the bottom center, and some are signed and given edition numbers while others have not been. Could you please provide a bit of insight on this?
Yeah, sure. Piech used a range of different papers to create his artworks and his prints and his artist books. And the majority of this paper was given to him for free. It was acquired from different kind of art departments that may have been getting rid of it. He would use anything he would get his hands on, really. So the quality of the paper that he used varied quite wildly because he was producing thousands of prints throughout his career, and he wasn't overly precious about using an archival quality paper or something that had kind of conservation purposes. It was about getting that message out and using the cheapest materials possible to show that message and to air that grievance or highlight a concern. So, for example, using different papers, he would experiment on different papers, but he would also use anything that was to hand. So this print, which is obviously about abolished torture. So this is actually printed on brown parcel wrapping paper. So it's a very kind of disposable material. And it creases very easily, but it wasn't really his concern. It was almost kind of experimentation of what would that look like on brown paper. I've got some. So that was part of what he was doing. Another paper for his artist books, for example. So this piece here. So there was an edition of 300. So he made 300 of these small artist books, the Walt Whitman poem, and this is on a range of paper, which we in the UK I call it sugar paper, which is something that's used in schools for kids to draw on. It's very cheap, very disposable. So Piech would have used these different colours in different colourway to create the book. So the edition of 300 may have varying papers within it, and the prints may be on different backgrounds within that edition itself. So it was just a means to an end, really. It wasn't about anything more than just getting a message out there and using what was to hand. So in response to the second part of the question, the idea of some of the prints having numbered stickers and labels on them, and I noticed on the website exhibition, which is fantastic. Congratulations on such a great project. A number of your pieces in your collection have these numbers on them. So I've got an example of one here from my collection, which there's the print, and then in the bottom corner there is a small number. So this is number 36, And my kind of understanding of that is it relates to an exhibition list that would have been produced alongside an exhibition that that piece would have featured in, and it was literally a price list with information. So I have actually got one of those exhibition lists here, which is part of my collection.
Wow.
So this one is from an exhibition of poster prints by Paul Peter Piech on the words and wisdom of Martin Luther King at London College of Printmaking in April 1978. So at the top, it's got that they're signed editions of 50. So the exhibition list goes over 2 pages, and there are 105 prints in that exhibition. And obviously, each one of those has 50 in the edition, which he would have made in advance. So it gives you the number, it gives you the price of the print and the title of it, which links directly back to the quote. But what's also really lovely about this list, really, which probably is reflective of the pieces that you have in your collection, so at some point they would have been exhibited alongside a list, is there's actually a cut-off piece at the bottom, which you can kind of do a postal order on and have the print sent to you. So this would have been typed up by Piech himself using a typewriter, and then copies would have been made and sent out or distributed as part of the exhibition. One other thing to note on some of the prints in terms of condition, so this one again with the number on it, some of them have pinhole prints, pinholes in the top corner. I'm not sure if you can see that. And then they also have sort of sticky tabs on the reverse. So there's the pinhole and the sticky tab. And that's where they would have been pinned up on the wall in the exhibition space, or you stuck up using kind of sticky Velcro pads. And a lot of these pieces were displayed unframed. And that's why there's those kind of marks on them. It's part of their history and where they may have been pinned up somewhere.
That's fascinating. It's super cool that you have one of those lists. That's awesome to see. And so to ask Rod's question, you commented that Piech was less concerned with the quality of his prints than the desire to get his message out. And given that craftsmanship in many art media is highly revered and enters into assessments of artistic quality, how did Piech's tendencies affect his work's critical reception by other printmakers or art critics?
I guess he kind of worked across a range of disciplines, as it were, so kind of creative disciplines or academic areas. So you could say that he was working within the realms of book art, he was working in the realms of book binding, letterpress, and lino cut, as well as things like wood engraving in some of the early books. But a lot of the critics kind of saw him as a creative energy, really, who was breaking all the rules and kind of crossing over disciplines at a time where, you know, if you were a typesetter and you're using letterpress, that's what you did. That was what you were an expert on, and you had very set guidelines of how that operated and how that worked, and that's how you became an expert in that field. You know, you were very much part of that particular element of the process. So Piech kind of crossed those boundaries and took elements from each of those disciplines and brought them together to create his practice. So he was very eclectic. It's a very kind of contemporary way of working, you know, using different mechanisms to create artworks and illustrations, in a sense, because he's using different approaches, but I think the impact of that varied quite wildly. He does have this very much, you either love it or you hate it kind of response to his work. I've got a couple of quotes from different publications that vary. So there's a really nice one in this magazine called New Art Review. which is a Welsh arts magazine that was around in the 1990s. And it kind of starts to talk about Piech's work and his work working within higher education and using poetry as a way of connecting with the students and creating artwork. So I'll just read an interesting quote from it. It might be suggested that no other artist currently at work in Wales has achieved such a clear public marriage of political statement and arresting, highly individual technique. The style of the man's work is quite unmistakable, and although he has worked in many forms, the imprint of Paul Peter Piech remains almost always recognisable. This is nowhere more true in that medium of the poster poem, in which Piech is now giving an exciting, highly public profile. So he kind of became known for it. It was his trademark, and that's what was to be celebrated, really. I think it depends on your outlook of work and art. I think crossing over boundaries is a very standard thing to do now, but in the 50s and 60s, more so in the 50s, it was deemed you were a specialist in one area and that's what you worked on. And you know, he was quite pioneering in that sense.
Jim, could you speak about Piech's use of type as a design element? You know, he's kind of created his own typeface. When, you know, the more we have quite a substantial collection here, and going through the prints and the flat file, you know, I noticed there was so many consistency with him hand carving type. And for someone who carves quite a bit, I stay away from type because it's a walk on the slippery rocks with, you know, mistakenly carving an R backwards or something. There's really not a lot you can do. You know, relief has a very unforgiving process. There's no backspace. And yet that does not seem to have held him back in all the work that he's made. And, you know, I see his use of type, and it's almost he uses it to convey his message, but he's also using it as a design element. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with you. It is very much a design element. His earlier work, so the piece that I showed before, sort of shows that crossover. So you know, he may do the cover design in a lino cut for lettering, but the inside of the book or the publication is very much you know, a combination of letterpress and lino cut. So on that smaller scale, he was combining the two. In the sort of, I suppose it was the 60s, the 1960s, that he became more prominent in terms of using lino cut and utilizing that medium as his main process, really. So I guess the way that he would work is he would work very rapidly. And the pieces of lino would be pretty big in some cases. You know, like the print behind me here, this is made up of two plates. You know, they both would have been carved by hand. Again, a piece like this one for Martin Luther King, again, it's a pretty substantial piece of lino to be cutting and utilizing it within the design process. So the way that he would work is he would work on kind of industrial pieces of lino that he would cut up into pieces, and then he would, in most cases, work freehand and just do the lettering by you know, by eye. He very rarely kind of mapped it out with chalk. He might do a basic outline, but so that's why there are spelling mistakes, and as you said, like a letter or a number around the wrong way, or I've run out of space, I'll try and squash an O or an E into it somewhere, or put it inside something else. So again, I think that was all part of his making. I think it wasn't. It could, you know, it could be that it becomes a very standardized process, and if you were to do this using something like you know, digital technology or Photoshop, you could arrange it all out with all the letters in there in a very constrained kind of logical way, and it would become like a uniformed grid, as it were. But I think that then takes away the appeal and the energy of the pieces, really, because it becomes too perfect in a way. And I think for Piech it was just about he didn't have time. He didn't have the time to kind of use wooden type or metal type to create the work on this scale, and also access to those materials to be able to do it. So I think the cutting of the lettering was very much it may be that he read something, and then he was inspired to make the piece there and then. So I think there was the instantaneousness of using lino was very much part of his reason for using it, really.
Actually, if you don't mind, I have one more question for Creed, and that's, with how prolific he was, and I want to say, and correct me if I'm, using the word wrongly, but it was almost like his work was not made for posterity, but almost for ephemeral because of his activism. And so we see, whether it be the tapes or anything else, but he wasn't making these for gallery or museum entry, or for the way that we celebrate them now. How is it important? Like, his pieces really speak out now, about what's going on. But there are contemporary printmakers that he's in conversation with, whether it be like Robbie Connell or Shepard Fairey or these other artists that actually go out and wheat paste their printmakings out for public consumption in that way. And it seems that he was doing this at a time when nobody else was really doing it, and I just think that that's really incredible. Can you speak on the fact that how precious were these to him?
Great point, really, because it was about getting the message out there, and it was kind of almost using them in a very disposable way. There are photographs of him where they're kind of taped to lampposts, or, as you say, kind of pasted to walls or on top of graffiti walls and things like that. So I guess he straddles both fields in one sense, because there is the kind of disposable element to his work, but also he did try and sell it, but it was sold relatively inexpensively. He gave a lot of it away. He would also give it to other institutions to sell on behalf of a good cause or something like that. So there are distinct kind of areas of his work, and whereby you can tell that certain pieces were made for exhibition purposes, or were for a gallery or for a commission. So if we go back to this Martin Luther King piece, it's signed and numbered and dated,
Right.
which suggests that he made an edition of them, which were to be sold. Now, that could have been in a gallery, or it could have been in a commercial space. He did work for kind of places like Heels in London, which was a very high market, upmarket department store, which had art spaces as well. So he was open to any possibility, and I think his work was starting to be picked up by gallery spaces, and he did have exhibitions of his work in different places, and that's how a lot of his work has been distributed, and galleries have been donated it or acquired it. I mean, in some cases he would have an exhibition of his work. So I know an example where a number of the pieces that I've got were from an exhibition that was at Coventry Cathedral in the 1980s. And it was all part of an interfaith exhibition. So it was about kind of bringing artists from different backgrounds together to show how they can work on kind of work together to kind of show and celebrate what it is that they all believe in, but collectively kind of looking at big issues. And after the exhibition, I think he probably had something like 20, 30 pieces in the exhibition. He never went and collected it. He just told you just keep it. So just keep it, sell it, do something with it. He wasn't overly precious about making money from it. No.
I love that. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
So I've been at FAU for 20 years, and over the years, we are not a collecting institution, but over the years, I had noticed these prints and always was careful to make sure that I knew where they were and that they were protected, but I never really examined them. And in more recent years, I finally got them out and started sharing them with others with a fair amount of excitement, because I knew that they were important in certain kinds of ways, both in terms of history, because I am a product to some degree of the counterculture in at least California, and that his work resonates with work that came out of the Bay Area at that time. But interestingly, in showing this to an art history professor, she took a more careful approach, which is relates to the question that I'm going to, in a sense, repose for her, that Piech's work is often looking at peoples from other cultures, and indeed his intent seems to be an altruistic, and he's concerned about starvation, he's concerned about apartheid in South Africa. But revisionist art history has questioned German expressionism, for instance, in the early 20th century, in the depiction of the other as kind of taking a Western perspective, perhaps an ethnocentric perspective, and the fact that sometimes his work, it would be wrong to say that his work is cartoonish, but the brevity that printmaking demands, in a sense. So the question is, are his images, and to what degree do they reflect this Western perspective?
Okay, it's a really big question, and I think it's something that's very contemporary at the moment and very much up for debate and reevaluation. And I think that's the beauty of having a collection of work that you can access in different over time, with different attitudes and different outlooks. I think I would agree with your comment about them not being cartoonish, but I think that they have got kind of a caricatureness about them. They do accentuate certain people's features, but I don't think that is down to don't think that's down to a Western bias. I think that's down to just his style of working, and I don't think it was kind of aimed at a particular race or a particular religion or an age range or a sexuality or whatever that might be. I think it was just the stylization of his work. So I guess there is a Western bias. You could argue there's a Western bias because he was brought up in that environment. But I guess the other side of it is his parents were Ukrainian. They came to the States in the early part of the 20th century to kind of find a better home, and they ended up in Brooklyn. They met in America. They found out that they had lived quite close by in Ukraine, but they had never met each other. And then obviously had their two sons in the States, and they lived in a very culturally diverse area of Brooklyn. And it was a very kind of a working class background, and it was about working hard and kind of speaking up and saying what was going on in the world and what was impacting on you. I'm not sure if there was I don't think there was a rose-tinted view of the world. I think he was passionate about injustices, and I don't think there was any kind of intent apart from showing things that were going on in the world that may or may not have been part of mainstream media, may need somebody who needs a leg up, somebody who needs their story being heard about, and it was just using his art as a mechanism to kind of say there's all this stuff going on around us and we're not necessarily questioning it or speaking about it, and it just becomes kind of throwaway in the same way as we're on to the next story, and when we keep consuming and we keep buying, and we don't kind of think about what else is going on in the world and how we could alter that or change that. So I think that's kind of what I would say about it. I think it was done with the best intentions, and you could argue that some of his imagery may have a Western bias to it, but I don't think there was any kind of inappropriate undertones to it. The retrospective exhibition in Manchester in the UK, so many of the posters that were from the 1960s and 70s became more and more relevant as the political climate in and around the UK changed, but also in the States, with Trump being elected, and people really saw the parallels really in terms of the messages he was bringing up within his artwork in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and then how relevant that is still now in the 21st century. The universal themes and concerns, and I would argue fundamentally they're about helping people on the ground, and kind of, it's not necessarily about criticizing an individual. It's just about how a mechanism or a system around us isn't necessarily working in the best of its ability because it's about one person's ego, for example.